Most people learning to draw and paint don't do this exercise, or not consistently, not regularly. And this is the type of thing that you really need to drill a lot, and it's so valuable, so important. But very often people will get distracted away by little fancy effects. How did they do this funky thing with the watercolor, you know, sprinkling salt on it or something? Or if it's digital, what about the brushes? What about this effect, color dodge, whatever? Fancy little things, but the fundamental principle is what makes great drawings and paintings. We'll look later at some beautiful drawings and paintings of all different types, illustrations, stuff like that, and see how they're built on these fundamental ideas we're going to drill in this exercise. And if you can consistently do this exercise, it's going to take you super far. So what is the exercise? First, it's going to be that we take a figure and we simplify the forms down and lay them out in a meaningful way in terms of angles and stuff like that. Second, we're going to break down the values into two buckets, two value breakdown. So this exercise requires, or is easiest to do, when you have a reference that is lit with one main light source. So you see here, here's a clue, is if you can look on the ground, you see how many cast shadows are coming off the figure? Just the one cast shadow going in one direction, because the figure is lit from one side. And that creates a shadow side and a lit side. So this is really good. When it comes to your materials, it's great if you can choose a material like this. It's just going to give you a flat gray value. And it's not really fancy in terms of soft edges. It's just giving you hard edges for this exercise, right? So in other words, I'm not really looking for a tool that's like this, that's going to allow this kind of real soft edges and variations. That's going to be lovely for later on when we're doing more fancy stuff. But for right now, we're drilling fundamentals into our heads, okay? And so for example, on paper, you could use marker pens. Like a dark gray marker pen could be really good for this. For the initial sketch, you could start with a pencil. Now, I'm doing this digitally, so I'm going to be able to use one layer for the sketch, one layer for the values. So first, I'm going to break down the pose in terms of simple underlying forms. So if I go to the middle of the collarbones, the line down the middle of the chest, the angle across the bottom of the rib cage, which is roughly perpendicular to that line down the middle of the chest, filling out the torso down here under the chest, and then coming up round the back of the neck, kind of creates an opening at the top, like a t-shirt collar. Then at the hips, I'm imagining the waistband of a pair of underpants. I actually had to paint underpants on this model because YouTube doesn't like models not to have underpants. And I actually have to do that an awful lot. It's a strange part of my job. But then the diagonal coming off the rib cage on each side to come over to that pants shape. Then from the middle of the collarbones coming up to the back of the ear, I get this muscle, the sternocleidomastoid muscle. I'm going to simplify the head into another kind of egg shape with a brow line, right, for the sort of eyebrow level. So it's going to be something like this. Then we're going to have the collarbones coming across like this. I have tutorials, like I say, for each one of these steps, so I won't go over it too much right now. Then the line across the bottom of the chest, and then the chest muscle, the pec, comes across to the arm, and there's that deltoid muscle, and that kind of just creates this simple shape that we can use. And then we get the trapezius at the back coming around like this. So this is the sort of simplification that we are going to try to sketch right now. So I'll just reduce that strength of that. And we're going to try and sketch this as best we can right now. So we're going to go, okay, so here's the middle of the collarbones, the line down the middle of the chest, roughly the bottom of the rib cage. Rib cage going to come around. There's a sort of opening at the top like this. There's a diagonal coming off that on each side like this, which brings us to that pants shape, something like that. Then I'm going to get my collarbones working like this, the line across the bottom of the chest, coming up to the upper arm, makes that shape with the deltoid muscle on each side like this. I get the sort of back edge of the torso, that back muscle coming up into the armpit, something like this. Then emerging from underneath that deltoid shape, I start to get the arm on each side. I think I've got this shoulder too high, so let me fix that. This comes down like, maybe like this. I'm probably going to have quite a few things wrong in my first attempt at the sketch, and I can fix them later on. Okay, I'm going to come round the butt. So now I've got this thigh, and instead of worrying too much about the details of the thigh, I will just make sure I have a sort of tapering shape, a shape that gets narrower as it comes towards the knee, like this. And then the knee, and then it gets narrow again coming towards the ankle. Then I got the other thigh, which is overlapped. It's kind of disappearing behind the thigh that's in front. Something like this. Notice that I tapered the leg down to 0 as if the ankle has no width to it. That's just something I like to do. You don't have to do that, but it just makes sure that I get that simple characteristic of the leg, which is basically that it gets narrower as it goes down. So now I can come from the middle of the collarbones up to the back of the ear and put in this kind of simple sort of egg shape for the head with an ear and a brow line. The ear and the brow line just really help you understand which way is this head pointing. And then I think I've got the cranium a bit small there, so the sort of where you keep your brains in, if you have any. And then you got your trapezius shape, which is that muscle at the back right there. So this is a good point to flip this horizontally and see all the million things that are probably wrong with it at this point. Because when you're sketching it, you don't see them as much, but then they get revealed as soon as you do a mirror image. So, how have I done here? I wonder if I could, usually I make the legs too long, but in this case, I wonder if I have them a bit short, possibly. And because it may be a bit small relative to the legs. So I wonder if I can just stretch those out a little bit and enlarge slightly. I actually don't think there's as much wrong as usual. If when you're doing this, you find that you have a lot of stuff going wrong, then don't worry. That's usually what happens to me, unless I'm just missing things. You're probably screaming at the screen right now, you got this wrong, look, that thing's out of place. But I can't see it.
Did you know you can start learning all of these ideas with our free 10-day mini course called Fresh Eyes? You'll be doing really fun stuff like moving around models to understand how these underlying forms work, completing exercises. People have absolutely loved this course. Or if you want to get more serious, we have courses in our study group. The foundations course in there is how you really get good at these particular skills, and then you can move on to our course on values as well. There's so much in the study group. It's a lot of fun. Check out the links below.
And now it's time for our 2-value simplification of the light and the dark. What we did do was think about lines to explain the underlying simple forms of the figure. Now we're going to think about shapes that explain the light and the dark. The tricky part about that is all the little variations, right? So obviously, you know, we've got like the really dark eyebrows here, and then the slightly lighter forehead, right? Or the very dark eyelashes, and then the slightly lighter cheek. I think sometimes people think that great artists are great because they see all these little tiny details. But actually, great artists are great because they can do away with that information, merge it all together, at least initially in their sketches. And so that's what the skill that we're going to try to work on right now. So, like, just thinking about the head in a simple terms, this side of the face, there's a face plane, it kind of turns a corner. The side of the head is lit, getting hit by light, and then the plane of the face here is not getting hit by light. The hair is all in dark pretty much because the hair itself is dark. So even where it's catching light, it's so dark that it's just kind of catching It's just moving into the dark, right? So this is all in dark, this is all in dark. Then coming down the neck, there's a line where the shadow starts on the neck. So if we come into it, we can see this is lit, this is dark. Where's the boundary point between the light and the dark? Runs something like this. You can get into this, all of these tiny little things like that, but at least initially, we're going to cut through the noise and go like that. So it's going to be, you know, like on those graphs where you've got like all these data points, but then you do the line of best fit. What's the line of best fit? Which is still meaningful and it still explains everything we want to know, but we're not going from every single little data point along the way. Okay? So now we're coming into the tricky part. This is the hard part. This chest right here. Look at this. Is that light or is it dark? This is hard, right? Because it's not lit clearly like this part, and it's not shadow like here under the arm. It's somewhere in the middle. What happens is that as the plane turns away from the light, it gets to a point where it's almost completely turned away from the light. This would be completely turned from the light. This is facing the light, but there's a point where it's just almost completely turned away, but not quite. It's still catching light, and the value starts to drop off, and it starts to get more close to the dark. But at the end of the day, it's catching light, right? If it's catching light, I'm putting it into the lights. So I'm going to say that this area is not catching any light, but this area is catching light. This is catching light. So it's going to go into the lights. Okay, so that's going to be my threshold where I cut it off. So I'm going to say something like this is where it's not catching light. There's a little patch on the other side of the chest, which is also catching light, right? So you can see a little shape here like this. And I want to keep these shapes as simple as I possibly can, right? So then the shadow seems to come down, come across and around, something like that. There's a cast shadow off the arm that seems to travel like this under the arm. And then on the shoulder, there's a shape of shadow like that. And I want to merge these shapes together. I don't want lots of little shapes. To the extent possible, I want to merge the shapes together. So if we look here, we can see the chin, the shoulder behind it, you know, this is all in the dark, so it's all going to get merged into the same shape at the end of this. So we come down the shoulder, there's a bit of light hitting that shoulder, there's a little bit of dark in the armpit, but then we come down the arm, something like this. It's really easy, by the way, when you're doing this, to make everything too bumpy and to overdo, like, oh, there's a bump, there's a bump, there's a bump, right? So this is something that happens to me quite a bit, and so it's useful to keep that in mind and try to reduce all the bumpiness that you get tempted into. So we come down the figure here. Now, once we get down to here, we have that cast shadow. A bit of the shadow continues across here, down the thigh like this. Then we get the other thigh behind. It all goes into the shadow, right? So we have these shapes of shadow, which I'm going to fill right now just to help me see what's going on. All right. Not too bad. So up at the face, you know, we kind of missed the eye socket, so we could put that in. We missed out the nose ideas, so we could start to carve in some of these ideas at this point. It's kind of useful to put in the big idea first, and then you can start to work in smaller shapes, smaller ideas. So the big idea was just the face plane was facing away from the light and that, but now we can start to work in the smaller ideas, maybe even indicate the moustache. Now, one thing I'm noticing is that I've got the head a little bit high, so the moustache is a little bit high relative to the shoulder, so it could be quite a good idea to shift the head down And so I'm going to try and do that now. So as I do this, it's tempting to add more and more details, but really what I want to do is see if how much I can get everything in place using the simplest marks possible, and then see what I can indicate without kind of overdoing it. All right. So I can continue that shape of shadow down the lower leg, get that calf muscle in there, down the side of the foot and the ankle and all of this, and on the other lower leg. So like I said earlier, as you go, it's going to be tempting to bring out the bumps, the lumpiness along the way, but you can just try to cut through the noise with big, simpler ideas and bigger, simpler shapes. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of the underlying sketch for now, and then I can refine what I've got further, and trying to keep it simple still. And I also think it's really worth putting in the cast shadows coming off the figure. So in this case, like coming off the feet. So I can start to indicate those. So as I do this, I want to make sure that my value shapes are I'm not just thinking 2D, I'm also trying to think about how these value shapes, these shadows, are wrapping over the forms that I'm seeing. So sometimes I'm thinking 2D almost. I'm just thinking about, okay, what is the actual shape that I'm seeing in almost abstract terms? But then sometimes I'm thinking about how this shape is wrapping over the shape of the chest, the pectoral muscle, or how this shape is wrapping over this shoulder muscle right here, this kind of thing. How are these shapes created by the changing planes of the head, the sides to the front and things like that? So sometimes I'm thinking in 2D terms, sometimes in 3D terms. So you could keep trying to work on it and perfect it forever, but at some point you've got to think, have I got the lessons that I needed to get from this pose? If I have, boom, move on to the next one. Why do I think this exercise is so powerful? It's because we have practiced 80 or 90% of the fundamental skills that make great drawings and paintings, and we've gone directly to them, right to the heart of it. So we simplified the forms really strongly, right? No details in those. Then we simplified the values really strongly. Just 2 buckets of value, no fancy soft edges, no refinement, just sharp edges. Here's the light, here's the dark. We got what we needed from this pose. We learned the big ideas and we move on to the next one as directly as we possibly can. And if we do that over and over again, we're going to get so confident with these skills, and these are the skills that lie underneath beautiful drawings and paintings. And then you can put the icing on the top. You can put the fine rendering of the charcoal if you want to, or the fancy digital color effects and the watercolor this and that, and do beautiful, beautiful things. But the heart of the thing that it's built on, the way the actual cake is baked is this. So you get really good at this, and then you can play with the colors, the warms and the cools, and this soft edge and that whatever, but you need to get these skills in place first. So I really recommend spending a good amount of time on this. You could just focus on the initial sketch. We teach this in our study group, in our foundations course. You could just focus on the values aspect. We teach that in our study group as well. And then we've been doing this full exercise in our co-drawing sessions where we all get on Zoom and we do this exercise together or other exercises together.
So we did this exercise together on Zoom. This is Jude's effort with it. She did such an amazing job. You can see we warmed up by doing the exercise with a camel first. Jennifer took this a little further by varying her edges using ideas from our Lane Brown workshop, which is also in the study group.
So if you want to practice your skills by getting to the heart of it, really working on the things that really matter and doing that together with me, check out the study group below. It's really, really powerful and it will get you focused on the stuff that actually matters.